Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to address a series of events and topics relevant to the UK in recent days concerning Islam and migrant crimes. In the process of writing this script, I had a profound sense of deja vu. I have addressed these topics before. Going back through the archives, I found the 2018 video op-ed Thoughts About a Peaceful Religion, and realised that that video said very many of the same things I want to say now. This is how long this problem has existed, and how much the world seems to be stuck on repeat. To the people wishing to tell me things along the lines of, "You're so 2016," or "Go back to 2016 where you belong," I'm once again going to remind them, we are still having these same conversations a decade later because you stopped paying attention to things, and nothing changed in the interim. So I'm going to insert that video and then expand upon the topic afterwards to say the new things I want to say on the topic. There will be a time code to skip to for just the new stuff if you would like to go there, although given the number of years that has passed since the publication of that video, I would encourage you to watch it in its entirety, but the choice is naturally yours. So I leave you in the care of a younger and equally good-looking me, and we'll see you again shortly. Teal dear. Let's talk about the sweet irony regarding the religion of peace, its many, so very many terror attacks in the West and around the world, and the recent instance of what could be seen as a retaliation attack, and how this just seems to be inevitable. By now, I'm sure you're aware of the attack that took place outside a mosque in Finsbury Park in the UK. The perpetrator was a white 47-year-old man whom eyewitnesses have described as saying, "I want to kill Muslims," after he ploughed a van through a crowd of worshippers. Now, I've been following this story on and off as time allows since it happened, as I do with all attacks that happen in the UK or indeed in Europe. And what has interested me most about this attack has been the reaction to it, especially from the media and on social media. So obviously the West over the past years has experienced numerous attacks at the hands of the religion of peace, and these attacks have come with ever-increasing frequency, especially in the last few months. And every time these attacks happen, we hear the same old story over and over. Attackers mass murder a number of people with knives, guns, automobiles and more, often while exclaiming "Allahu Akbar," and we instantly see the apologists come out. The sort of people who, even in the midst of a terror attack, people being shot and stabbed in front of them, with the perpetrator shouting, "This is for Allah," will still announce that it's not Muslims, it has nothing to do with Islam, #NotAll, and all that other nonsense. What follows is of course the predictable cycle. Social media covered in flag overlays on display pictures, #PrayFors, #NotAlls, and all manner of claims about lone wolves, mental health, how this is nothing to do with Islam, a few candlelit vigils, and claims we need to not let this divide us, and how we need to be vigilant against right-wing extremism and Islamophobia, and often some bizarre idea that condemnation of the attacks carried out in the name of Islam is somehow proof of racism against all brown people, and that our main concern shouldn't be the victims or their families, but instead should be a concern that Muslims might be unfairly stereotyped or harassed as a result. Apparently, when a group of Muslims kills a group of white Europeans, the real victims are all the other Muslims in the world. At this point in time, this cycle has become so ingrained in people, we all know exactly what's going to happen before it's even happened. It just seems like an inevitable. Add to this the fact that we have the political elites constantly telling us we just need to get used to this. Terror attacks are just part of life these days, and when they happen we just have to carry on as usual, like nothing ever happened. Don't rock the boat. Don't make any complaints. Don't seek justice. Don't seek change. Just keep your eyes downcast and pretend nothing happened. So we know there is going to be no change to this pattern. It will continue to happen. It will continue to increase. We know this. After all, if someone displays a behaviour you don't like, and you take no action to attempt to remedy that behaviour, then it will continue. This is basic behavioural psychology. Is it really then any surprise that eventually the citizenry of a country, in this circumstance, will eventually take matters into their own hands outside the law? This would seem to be the case in the instance of the attack on Muslim worshippers at Finsbury Park. And what is the reaction we're seeing to this from the media and from Islam apologists and leftists on social media? Nothing about having to carry on as usual, nothing about how these attacks are just part of living in a city, nothing about how this shouldn't divide us, nothing about how this is a lone wolf with mental health problems. No, instead it's all about white supremacy and racism and how this is absolutely a terror attack and we need to say that as loud as possible. This is not being termed an incident, as the Islamic attacks are so often termed. No, this particular thing, when a white person attacks Muslims, that's real terrorism. None of the usual apologia is applied here. No, this is just straight-up terrorism and racism and xenophobia and white supremacy and proof that the West truly is the most evil and vile place in the world and straight white males are to blame for everything. Again. This may very well be the first signs of the pot boiling over. If politicians aren't going to do anything to stop the Islamic problem in the West, then people are going to come to the conclusion that they must do it themselves, because it seems like the only way for them to carry on their lives and be sure that their children will grow up in a safe nation, free from random Islamic bombings and car and knife attacks. And a quick word here on the mental health aspect, because it's something interesting and I've mentioned it a little bit before, and how it's often used by apologists in these sorts of instances. Yes, mental illness can be a factor, and should not be ruled out because an ideology is involved. When it comes to the likes of Islamic attacks, mental illness does seem a possibility, given the massive numbers of them owing to higher rates of quite a variety of problems in Middle Eastern populations, possibly owing to a higher rate of consanguinity, more colloquially known as inbreeding in their populations relating to cultural and religious reasons. This may be exaggerated when combined with the founder effect, a loss of genetic variation when a genetic population is established in a new location in isolation from its larger origin, resulting in an increased likelihood of genetic homozygous mutation. Such effects have been witnessed in Iceland, amongst Ashkenazi Jews throughout Europe, and also amongst many Muslim populations, both in the Middle East and in the West, where the practice of consanguineous marriage has been brought over from their country of origin. This may go some way to explain why, for example, Pakistani births in the UK account for 33% of all children born with genetic illnesses, while only accounting for 3% of total births. 55% of UK Pakistanis married their first cousins. Unsurprisingly, along with physical problems as a result of children of such a union, there is also a far higher likelihood of the manifestation of psychosis, schizophrenia, and various other mental illnesses. When you have a population that, by dint of its religious beliefs, is more prone to the creation of individuals with the potential for mental health problems, then being told it is their duty to fight non-believers and spread their way of life, it shouldn't really be surprising that that population produces a larger number of extremely violent people. The main problem here comes then not only from their ignorance of genetics and seeming lack of willingness to correct this pattern of behavior, because it is deemed by Allah to be totally okay to breed like this, thus making the practice perfect and beyond reproach in their eyes, and then you combine this with religious teachings of violence and martyrdom, and simply not trying to treat any mental illness present in their population, either owing to a belief that the person is the way Allah decreed them to be, or from ignorance of what mental health is and the causes and potential outcomes of such problems. Indeed, in the paper, Faulty Genes, Consanguinity in the Pakistani Community, many respondents to questions about mental illness in their offspring and links to genetics were unwilling to accept the link between cousin marriages and physical and mental illness, and instead attributed the traits to the will of God. Higher likelihood of mental illness combined with a social environment that encourages deceit and violence creates what is seemingly a perfect storm, and in this instance the religion of Islam is a catalyst in the complex equation. And of course, there will always be those who are mentally sound and are just committing these terrorist acts because they've been told to by their holy book. And given the number of Islamic terror attacks that happen in Europe and the number of foiled attacks, the excuse of mental illness, even at the higher rates we've outlined earlier, wears thin to the point where it is highly unlikely that it is able to explain all of them. I have said before, and will say again, Islam is the problem here. It is fundamentally incompatible with Western values. Any Western value, liberal or conservative, left or right, because Islam is not just a religion. It is a legal system, it is a family structure system, it is a moral system, it is a banking and trading system, it's even a personal grooming and dressing system. These values cannot be separated out from Islam. They are integral to it, because these things are laid out and explained in the Quran. And the Quran is the infallible word of God, perfect in its creation. As such, there is simply no such thing as moderate Islam. There is only Islam in its true form when all its teachings, rules, and advices are taken heed. Islam is, by design, an imperialist religion built on conquest, with a mandate for theocratic rule. This is why there is the concept of an Islamic nation. Every piece of land that belongs to a Muslim nation belongs to Allah. Any land that is taken from Muslims, or made less Islamic, is therefore an affront to Allah and must be redressed. This goes hand in hand with their beliefs about non-believers. They must be fought until dead, converted to Islam, or living in submission to Islam. This also ties to the deceit built into Islam in the forms of taqiyya and tariya. Taqiyya being the concealment of your Islamic faith should you feel threatened by, say, being in a non-Muslim majority state like the UK. It is therefore this very practice that allows Muslims to be seen drinking in bars and in some cases partaking in activities such as homosexual sex before committing a terrorist attack. This is taqiyya, concealing their Islamic identity so that they can then cause their acts of destruction, which, because it is a war against non-believers, and the death is in pursuit of the spread of Islam, absolves them from any sin in those acts. Tariya is intentionally misleading people by creating a false impression, which ties nicely to the Islamic concept of kitman, the lie by omission, such as intentionally misquoting the Quran to leave out pesky little parts of it where it explicitly states how non-believers are to be killed if they do not convert or submit. Muruna is the final piece of this puzzle. It literally allows Muslims to commit acts against Islam in the name of spreading Islam. For example, the sin of suicide can be forgotten and forgiven if the aim of the suicide is to combat the infidels by leaving them more in fear of Islam and thus more likely to submit to Islam. Tenets such as these can be found in all denominations of Islam, often simply under different names, and it is these beliefs that makes Islam such a powerful colonizing religion. It has baked into it rules that basically say, do anything necessary to expand Islam. You can see how these rules of deceit apply to even so-called moderate Muslims. They may say, Islam allows you to practice your own religions in an Islamic state, and this is technically true. However, they will not tell you that it is in submission to Islam, including the payment of the jizya, which is basically the infidel tax. Oh, and by the way, as a side note for non-believers, Muslims will tell you that slavery is forbidden in Islam, but will always neglect to tell you that that rule only applies to the enslavement of other Muslims. Non-Muslims can still be enslaved, although there is some contention about this, but only really in the West. Slavery is still practiced in Muslim nations. Thus, we have reached a point where it really does seem that a peaceful solution simply cannot happen, because the people in positions to make such a peaceful solution happen to simply refuse to do so. These are your politicians, the people who, when you, the person they are supposed to represent, point out to them that there is a problem with Islam in the West, will simply call you a racist and tell you to stop being such a bigot. As such, it is no surprise that people are taking the action that they see as necessary to deal with the problem of Islam. Now, this is not me supporting this violent attack in Finsbury. On the contrary, I would rather there be a peaceful solution, and I see these extreme acts of violence as a very poor choice of tactic. But what must be considered here is that there is always a point where self-defense becomes necessary. You cannot sit back and take beatings all your life. You must stand up for yourself sooner or later to stop that behavior. And if that requires an escalation of force on your part to rival or exceed that of your violator so that they will stop, since it is the only way that they will cease their actions, then you have been left with no choice in your course of action. I do not believe that we are at that point, but we are so very close to it now that it is not something that can simply be hand-waved away and dismissed entirely as something that may or may not happen in the future. These symptoms are visible, and yet many would rather ignore them than treat the disease. Much like ignoring a damaged finger until you require your entire arm to be amputated as a result of infection, rather than just setting the bone and taking some antibiotics. Unfortunately, there are some diseases that can only be dealt with by the knife. I do firmly believe that Islam needs to be removed from the West. It has proven time and time again to be incompatible with any principle held by Westerners. I still believe that violence is not the answer, but we are rapidly running out of time to deal with the problem before violence becomes inevitable. Indeed, it could be said that that is already the case. At this point in time, it seems more and more as if we will have to go so far as to outright ban Islam, make the practice of the religion illegal, outlaw the spreadings of its teachings, and destroy all buildings and books on the subject, and deport those whom refuse to convert to any other religion or simply give up religion entirely. It is an extreme position, but after so long and so many times we see the same thing over and over and over, I fear that it is the only course of action left to protect the people in Europe. Something that your governments should be doing and are currently failing to do in a spectacular fashion. It's either that or a total, from the ground up, reformation of Islam. But since their literature is the infallible and perfect word of God, I don't see that happening anytime soon, and artistic license to interpret things differently can only go so far. It is easy to hate people, but in this case, it is not entirely the people. It is the ideas and values that they hold that are the problem. It is these ideas and values that push them to commit these terrible acts, and even for those who don't go so far as to commit them, they are often still in support of the fundaments behind the action. This is why you will find that the majority of Muslims support the idea of Sharia law, want homosexuality to be punished by death, believe that leaving Islam should also be punished by death, because these are the punishments laid out in the Quran, and they believe that the Quran is the infallible word of God, perfect in its creation. Only by rejecting these ideas can these people actually exist within Western society. Until that point, compatibility is simply impossible. Until something is done, the patterns we're seeing are going to stay the same, and only increase. And odds are we are going to start seeing violent backlash against Islamic populations. some as a result of mental illness, but others simply from people who feel as if they have no other choice in course of action, because they see Islamic attacks still taking place. It's that feeling of nothing being done, that feeling of hopelessness, that is a danger in itself, because when you have nothing left, you have nothing to lose. In this instance, the case of the Finsbury Park Mosque, it seems like this is the situation, that it is more ideological than some other cause, such as mental illness, although since the case is still being investigated and information will be withheld from the public until that is concluded, we can't say for sure. A man drove over 100 miles in a rented van specifically to target that mosque, a mosque that has been linked to dozens of Islamic terrorist attacks. And the responses from the media, politicians and the left? Well, the right is radicalizing their own, and they're upset that they're being caught and called out for it. Because, that makes more sense than people falling into patterns of radical behavior as a result of seeing Islamic terror attacks and the ineffectual hand waves of limp-wristed politicians and the endless apologia from the media, leaving them feeling as though they have to take the action themselves. I see this all as somewhat a grim and sad inevitable. And now I have nothing else to say on the subject. I am sick and tired of repeating myself over and over and over. And every time something like this happens and this conversation reopens itself again, it will only ever be closed at the exact same spot it started. So I'll simply leave things there by saying thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next week when the next Islamic attack in Europe inevitably takes place, and this entire cycle happens again for the however many 100th time. Well, in the 8 years since that video, I am no longer sick and tired of talking about this, and am in fact reinvigorated to do so in recent months. In the time since the publication of that video, I have been proven right on all counts. People are sick of the ever-increasing rate of change in the UK, high streets becoming unrecognisable because of demographic and religious change in certain areas, previously white, working-class, atheist and/or Christian areas replaced with black and brown, mostly Muslims, and the increasing crime rates that go hand in hand with such changes. This is objectively true. If you are someone who still denies the causal link between large-scale migration, demographic change and crime, then at this point in time, with so much objective data proving this to be true, I simply assume willful ignorance and thus malice on your part. The rise of mass public protests around hotels housing illegal immigrants as a result of various offences being constantly committed by illegal immigrant invaders. In this case, though, the main catalysts have been sexual offences against women and children, particularly girls, not simply terrorism itself. Something that should have been stated at the time by myself, and indeed was elsewhere, but that particular video was focused more on the Finsbury Park Mosque attack, thus relating it more to terrorism and response to terrorism than garden-variety gynocentrism. As noted, we will see increasing rates of vigilante action as the state has proven itself incapable or unwilling to take action. This has been proven true over and over. White British people getting arrested for detaining a foreign dark-skinned man flashing his genitals at children on the train, to name but the latest event. I have no doubt that others will have happened in the time between writing this paragraph and the publication of this talk. Given the ever-increasing frequency of reports of migrant sex attacks, violent attacks, and now mysterious need for road signs warning people of phone snatchers in the nation's capital. Well, this all points to the general social decay of the nation. We have seen time and again the defense for this in the press and on the left. White people do it too, and white people do most of it. Once again demonstrating their lack of ability of understanding the statistical concept of per capita, thus rendering them ineligible for having this conversation, by dint of not being able to understand basic mathematical concepts necessary for understanding population dynamics. People who make these arguments must either be ignored outright, If encountered in person, either given a very slow introduction to basic statistics with lots of big, clear, colourful pictures to aid their understanding, or simply mocked, ridiculed, and laughed at until they fall silent. It is sad that it takes the sacrifice of society's girls and women to get it to begin to take a problem seriously, but that is, historically speaking, what is necessary. As I noted in my video concerning the Shiloh Hendricks case, the image of a woman under threat with child in tow has been the rallying cry of every society ever. As a side note, in that same video, I made an observation that Seamus Hendricks would not be so lucky as Shiloh Hendricks, and I have been proven correct in multiple instances. There have been repeated instances of men becoming fatigued and calling black people by the dreaded N-word on camera, and not a single one of them has become a millionaire with a widespread outpouring of celebration for being the savior of the white race. Once again, gynocentrism rules the roost, and the tradcucks clucking about more white babies are once again shown to be the simps that they truly are. Ignore the issue until your women henpeck you into action. Pathetic. What must be seen here is the truth of the matter. Not only will things get worse, but they must get worse. This is the only means by which the general public will be forced into action. There has been concern raised for decades about the dangers of ethnic conflict in the UK, resulting from the loss of homogeneity of the nation. See back to Enoch Powell's famous, or infamous, Rivers of Blood speech to see how far back this concern goes. Another main push against this, indeed the last one that seems to have had any impact before its destruction, or implosion as the case may be, was that of the British National Party under the leadership of Nick Griffin some 20 years ago. A party that succeeded in getting 2 MEPs elected, but failed to achieve anything of note in the nation as a whole. Most of their campaigning was focused on the dangers of demographic and religious change in the UK. As with all people, past, present and future, they were slandered as racists, bigots, Islamophobes, etc. Nigel Farage, the current repeatedly flip-flopping seeming best hope the UK has to reverse this, proudly claimed a not insignificant part in helping to destroy that part of the right wing of Britain. A claim that, along with many others of his actions over the years, will always leave me personally to regard him with suspicion. I can't help but think if the wider public had paid attention to these myriad warnings over the last few decades, how different things would be. Alas, we must now bear the brunt of what is to come, not fall into fanciful wishes of what yesteryear could have brought. Things in this country must get worse. Problems left to fester will always require larger and more radical action as a result of their growth over time than had they been dealt with when they were fresh and small issues. This means more victims within the white, mostly working class of the country, more assaults, more sexual assaults, more rapes, more robberies, more muggings, more arsons, more everything. This is the only way more and more people will begin to realise the severity of the situation. It is becoming too big to hide. It must grow more. There are still pockets of the liberal and left, middle and upper classes suitably insulated against this problem. It must grow to the point they cannot not only deny it any further, but be actively impacted by it personally. I do not relish this increase in suffering and chaos, and I have no desire to encamp myself anywhere near so-called accelerationists who would gleefully attempt to speed up this misery. Indeed, I have in my own life spent the last 20 years at least of my political action attempting to prevent this situation. However, this is what must happen now. Suffering is what drives people to action. Struggle makes for strength. This is where we are. Halting immigration may have been enough 20 years ago. Now, halting immigration will do nothing. Repatriation en masse, or remigration as it is being termed in modern conversation, is now the solution. This will not be peaceful. It cannot be peaceful. People living in this nation footholded here with children potentially, a large number living on social benefits in social housing, having brought family members over here from afar, people having jobs, legal or illegal, looking at you Uber Eats and Deliveroo drivers. This is the growth of the problem. In order for this to be fixed, there must be robust legal change, and there must be force to back up that change. People in these such positions will not leave simply because a polite but firmly worded letter arrives through their door one day. Unpalatable as it may be to some, this will require rounding people up, forcing them onto transports, and removing them. If people cannot stomach this, then they should not be standing by and talking about remigration. At all points, state power and authority is, ultimately, backed up by the threat of the use of the state's relative monopoly on violence. This situation is no different. What is yet to be seen is if the state will listen to the populace. There is growing civil unrest that will spill into civic conflict. Civil war, I think, is not the correct term for this, owing to civil wars often requiring fracturing of state, police, military, etc. This could happen, but we will have to see how things progress in the future. Indeed, even without these state splits, it could still be called civil war after a fashion. I just prefer and lean towards a more formal definition. What is certain is large-scale civil unrest fracturing along ethno-religious lines, increasing tribal violence along these lines, revenge attacks, perhaps even targeted attacks against innocents of each group. The manner of state response here is key. Currently, it is actively engaged in suppression and censorship, hoping to quash outrage, discussion, and the noticing of things, while continuing to heap excess fuel on the fire. If this continues, larger-scale violence is only more inevitable. Unless what I highly suspect the government is hoping is true, that winter will bring a natural end to these problems. We'll see how that plays out. In the intervening 8 years since I made the video that started this presentation, many things have happened and changed. Not so much my opinion on the issue, which still stands firm. Islam must be removed from the UK and the West more broadly. Islam is also a stand-in proxy for demographic change as well. After all, an invading religion is a threat to the geist of a people, the spirit of a nation being, after all, the product of the people within interacting with the environment around them. Changing either of these variables will alter the nation as a whole. The incursion of both Islam and large numbers of black and brown people attacks white European, Christian or secular nations on both fronts simultaneously. As such, both must be combated and made to cease and reverse course immediately. To this end, I am herein going to do another thing I have not done for a number of years, some 8 or 9 by now, a pseudo-election manifesto. Given how much furore there has been around elections in the UK in particular, I feel this is a good format to take. The catastrophic collapse of support for the currently sitting Labour Party, and to a lesser extent the Conservatives as well, after their over a decade of failure to fix this issue, leaves the wings open to the likes of Reform, who currently stand as the closest thing to a right-wing party the UK has. Thus also being the closest thing the UK has to a party that may do something about this issue. However, I have my doubts, given the flip-flopping of Nigel Farage on this issue and the constant fracturing and power struggles of various other players within the party, often leading to them breaking out into their own independence or formation of a competing party. This will effectively split the vote and work against a large-scale right-wing revolt against the mainstream, but this is outside the scope of what I want to talk about today. To this end, I now append my Pseudo-Manifesto. Any part of this, I believe, if taken up by a mainstream party, salted to taste of course, would serve as an excellent basis to build a successful campaign towards building a brighter future for the nation in the form of addressing people's main concerns regarding the demographic shifts, religious changes, and increasing social and criminal problems the nation is experiencing. This will be broken down into different areas, starting with visas. An immediate cap will be placed on the number of visas that can be issued for any reason. I'm going to pick the arbitrary number of 100,000, pick your own as you desire. This can also be amended up or down in the future as necessary, preferably down. Entering the UK for any reason will now require a visa. This should hopefully only be temporary until the problem of the movement of people and demographic change has been fixed, and we could eventually work to repeal this requirement for certain countries that have shown themselves trustworthy to our nation's interest, with a view towards other similar nations, the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and select European nations. The visa system would still be in place for all other nations. A percentage ratio will be kept between 4 major categories. 1. Work. 2. Education. 3. Tourism. 4. Other. Since visas are open to exploitation, indeed this exploitation is a major cause of the changes we are seeing in recent days, there are loopholes that must be closed. The category of other allows for flexibility in reasons and to potentially expand the demand for other categories as needed. Tourism, of course, being the ideal target, since that will bring foreign money into the nation as a whole, but I'm mostly thinking of an allowance for immediate family of workers. This will be limited absolutely to spouse and biological children of both these people only. This will be subject to documented proof in the form of marriage and birth certificates, and possible DNA testing of the children. If this sounds draconian, good, it is meant to. Barriers must be put up to entry to ensure the people who attempt to enter this nation do so with great interest and a higher than average ability to benefit the nation as a whole, and indeed be benefited by the nation in return. There will also be a limit placed on the number of biological children that can be moved, set to the average indigenous birth rate rounded down to the nearest whole number. This is necessary to help ensure demographic change does not come to the UK too fast, with large numbers of children being brought in one go. However, once someone is within the nation, there is technically nothing to stop them having more children, although this can be considered later with regards to the second tier of citizenship rights possessed by migrants, and in the most extreme cases, child caps or limits for migrants with the threat of deportation if this is exceeded. Although I highlight this as an incredibly extreme method. It does also make the assumption that we allow workers to move family here at all, which is entirely optional. In instances of work visas being given to a person with family, the projected earnings of the individual with the work visa will be taken into account as a variable for consideration. They must be projected to have an income to support themselves and their spouse and children for an amount of time indicated by a work contract, to an amount that can be considered reasonable and above the baseline earnings for the median UK worker, perhaps something along the lines of average wage plus percentage, or some multiplier, for example, double the minimum wage for a 40-hour work week, as but 2 starting points for consideration. This above-average consideration for earnings will also help to ensure that particularly able, intelligent and skilled individuals are most likely to succeed the visa application process, and this will also incentivize companies to either train and hire more people from the UK as a priority, if this consideration makes foreign applicants less desirable, or pay an appropriate amount for services rendered by foreign workers. Once the visa or work contract expires, so too does right to remain in the UK. Temporary visas for short-term use for specific jobs, such as international truckers, can be made available, although it may simply be easier to have shipped or trucked goods handed over at the point of entry. Student education visas being the worst offender in regards to exploitation, with so-called students needing to bring over their entire family so they can study in the UK, this is obviously absurd. If you are unable to study without your family present, then international education is not for you. Amend your life goals as appropriate. Education visas will not and must not allow for the movement of families, and is only for people who are engaged in acts of education. There may be, pending further consideration and debate, for the potential for a limited subset of education visas that function with a similar ability to the afore laid out work visas regarding the movement of families to allow for spouses and biological children only. However, this is very tentative and still leaves the door open to too much abuse. Further to this, people undertaking education in the UK who are from abroad as part of their education visa will be required to work in the UK for a period of time to be debated and defined later. This can either be in the form of state-backed work programs, although these cannot be assured to be suitable for the fields the student in question studied for, or an assured place in a business or industry sponsoring the student through their education, or an agreement with the education institute and a business or industry to supply workers directly from said education institute. This would double as a very nice incentive for universities and other education providers to help students actually be able to work in their chosen field after graduation. This should also help to cut down the problem we have of myriad diploma mill style certifications of education that provide no value to anyone other than padding the coffers of the institutes, fleecing the young, able and enthusiastic of their time and money. The UK has put effort and resources into giving someone some of the finest education to be found in the world. The UK will now benefit from that investment first, and before that person leaves to work elsewhere. This does, of course, make one somewhat bold assumption, that being that the UK education system should be in any way open to non-UK citizens. Given that we're addressing paid-for higher education, I don't see it as being unreasonable that a small number of particularly brilliant foreigners be allowed to train here, with the proviso that they be required to work in the UK upon graduation. This works on the assumption that we maintain the current system of foreign students being required to pay more for education than natives. This has, however, been part of the problem, with education institutes being one of the major back doors into this nation. The hope is that the express limiting of this, combined with certain later propositions in this presentation, will serve to reduce this to a better position. However, I am open to the idea of simply preventing migrants from accessing the UK education system entirely. Indeed, one could lead to the other. There would, of course, I think, need to be some manner of allowance for work visa holders looking to engage in continued professional development if their job were to require further education to better serve the nation. Specifics of these sort of things could be worked out later. Benefits. Any person who has entered the UK illegally will not be able to claim any UK benefit. There are no exceptions. If this means they starve or die of exposure in a hedgerow, so be it. They should not have come here. They are not our problem. Maybe they should have used the hundreds of hours they spent travelling and thousands of pounds they gave to people smugglers to set up their own homes in their own nations. People entering the UK under a visa will be eligible for limited access to certain state-backed services under certain provisions, namely access to essential life-saving care under the NHS. Essential life-saving herein and in any following instance meaning you will be defibrillated and given oxygen, get bleeding staunched, foreign objects removed, bones set. You will be able to walk out of the hospital. After that, you're on your own. No medication, no aftercare, etc. Those will be provided to you by your own privately arranged healthcare. Tourism visas will allow basic emergency access to the NHS in the event of life-threatening injury. Services in this manner will be liable for repayment either privately by the individual in totality at the point of treatment, via previously arranged travel insurance, which will be required to access the tourist visa system. This should have made it impossible for someone without such insurance to enter the UK, however there may be flexibility in the form of direct cash deposits made to the UK in advance as a form of insurance. There is also the possibility of arrangements with other nations that have socialised healthcare for direct financial exchange for the assistance of their citizens while abroad, for example something similar to the European Health Insurance Card, or via directly agreed upon treaties with individual nations that their citizens may be treated in the UK for equally agreed upon access of UK citizens to their nation's medical facilities while abroad. Put simply, there must be some manner of agreement in place to cover medical costs incurred by tourists while in the UK. Those under work visas will already be working in tax-paying jobs in the UK for an assured amount of time. This was defined as part of the terms of their work visa. They should thusly have no need for any form of state benefit, and they will thusly be inaccessible. Early and/or unexpected termination of employment will simply result in early and/or unexpected deportation, not access to the benefits system. Student visas will be treated in much the same manner. The cost of their education and/or housing will be taken care of by the student in question in a manner they see fit. Benefits of any kind are thus unnecessary and inaccessible. If any of this proves inadequate or still open to too much exploitation, then the NHS will merely refuse treatment to any person incapable of proving birth and citizenship within the UK, and benefits of all kinds will be reserved exclusively for people who can also prove birth and citizenship within the UK. Although this may cause problems with second and third generation migrants, this will be addressed later. Border crossings. Illegal border crossings cease immediately with the use of violence supplied by the Royal Navy against small boats crossing the Channel. They are easily identifiable, will be given warnings in multiple languages to turn around and leave British waters or never enter them in the first place. If cooperation is not forthcoming, then a shot from the ship's main cannon will be. Legal border crossings will be handled as per the visa system laid out previously. Crime. Crime committed by migrants will be subject to a second tier of more harsh punishments than British-born citizens. This will include the reenactment of the death penalty for murder and rape. There will of course be a high standard of evidence for this death penalty, direct video footage, DNA evidence, etc., to reduce the likelihood of false positives down to zero. Mental health will be taken into consideration, but only in extreme cases, such as identifiable forms of psychosis or hallucination caused by conditions such as schizophrenia, forms of seizure, etc. Hallucinations or psychosis induced by exogenous substances will not be excusable unless it can be demonstrated that this was caused as an unforeseen side effect of medication prescribed by a doctor, at which point the individual in question will be deported by force as priority or confined for life to a high-security medical facility. Deportation would of course be the first and ideal solution. This nation should not have to house and pay for people who arrived here to be an active detriment to the health of the nation. Any crime committed by a migrant that would result in jail time will result in immediate deportation. Once again, this country should not and will not pay to house people who have arrived here to be an active detriment. This could be expanded out to deportation for crimes that require the payment of a fine over a certain amount. Deportation for crimes will result in the immediate seizure of property and assets of the criminal in question that are held within the UK. These will then be sold off to either pay recompense to the victim or family of the victim as appropriate up to a certain amount, or paid directly into the tax system to benefit the nation as a whole. It should be noted that to help combat the problem of second-generation migrants being more militant and extreme than their parents, this migrant status of justice will be extended to children of migrants, even if they are born within the country. The same can be said for access to benefits as listed above. This will require the creation of a second class of birth citizen, those with 2 or 1 migrant parents. These punishments will include the ability to be deported to the nation of parents' origin. This is, once again, an extreme position, and one that should be able to be temporary until the demographic and religious problems we have are reduced or outright cease. Foreign aid. Foreign aid payments will continue despite this being an unpopular position. However, there will be notable tiers and uses and a drastic change to the overall process. The first tier will be for genuine humanitarian need in the event of emergency in nations the UK is closely allied to or treated with. Herein I am once again thinking of CANZUK nations, the USA, and certain European nations. In other nations, foreign aid will no longer be an act of charity. Instead, it will be used to make purchases within the nation to which they are given, namely in the form of land. This will provide the UK with a strategic foothold in many nations around the world. These foothold areas will then serve as deportation grounds for people being removed from the UK, such as failed asylum claims, people entering the country illegally, or people having citizenship or right to remain removed. If someone being deported from the UK refuses to elect a nation to be deported to, they will simply be assigned a nation. They have demonstrated ample ability in the past to move to nations that they wish to. This skill will no doubt aid them in finding their way to a nation of their choice that is not the UK once they have been dropped off elsewhere. These foothold areas will of course serve as more than just drop-off points, and can also be used for diplomatic reasons, especially if they have dedicated air or seaports or other forms of transportation to be used by dignitaries, emissaries, etc. for both entry to and exit from the UK. The area assigned to migrants who have been deported will not be prisons. They will simply be tent camps with no fences and minimal support in the form of a strict minimum prison diet and the possibility of labour use, either necessary or simply as time-wasting exercises such as digging and filling in holes. This will actively encourage the deportees in question to simply leave and wander off, never to be a burden to the UK again. If nations object to deportees wandering off this reservation into their nation, so be it. It is not our problem. They are welcome to place a border outside the UK border of these centres and deal with the invaders as they see fit. This is not our problem. Citizenship. The last few decades, the last 10 years especially, there has been a massive influx of people granted right to remain or outright citizenship to the UK under dubious circumstances. These will be reviewed effective immediately with the view of stripping as many as possible of this falsely given right. The last 20 years of handouts of citizenship will have the default position of being revoked. It will be the duty of those given citizenship to justify their right to remain. One such criteria as an example could be tax contribution. Have you ever had a tax-paying job while in the UK? The answer no will result in immediate removal of citizenship and deportation. An allowance could be made for spouse earnings being above average for a proven minimum period of time in a projected future, similar to visas, but this may need to be later developed. In the immediate, this action is about removing as many people as swiftly as possible. Have you ever claimed any sort of benefit in the UK? The answer yes will result in immediate deportation. Regardless of employment, the UK does not need foreigners taking without providing. It is unlikely that any income will cover the cost of any benefit paid. Indeed, this has been demonstrated to be the case in several studies on the topic of migrant workers versus benefit payments. They take more than they contribute. As previously indicated, the children of migrants will be subject to this same standard. This includes being born in this country. There must also be a cut-off point to unemployed children of migrants who are of majority age. While in education their presence is fine, however they must within a reasonable time frame have a tax-paying job of some description. How long this time frame is can be debated of course. 1 year of unemployment, for example, without claiming benefits, which would be forbidden to them anyway, with an offer of mandatory state employ at the end of this voluntary period of job seeking. If this mandatory state job is refused, then deportation will result. Once again, this may sound draconian, to which the answer is yes, and that's a good thing. Foreigners breeding welfare dependents as a means of gaining income must be stopped. As to the potential loophole of immigrant children being signed off of work permanently owing to disability, this will also result in deportation as it is too open to abuse. The only potential caveat to this would be the earnings of the parent in a manner similar to non-working spouses. Language. The only languages recognised in the UK and provided on state literature and services will be the recognised indigenous languages of the British Isles, namely English, Scottish Gaelic, Welsh Gaelic, Irish Gaelic, Manx, Cornish, Braille and British Sign Language. This will not only serve existing UK populations as a priority, but will also serve to reinvigorate and preserve the lesser-known indigenous languages of this nation. Translators for foreign languages will still be needed for and provided for diplomatic reasons between states. Translators for foreign languages for personal use, read interacting with the state whose language you cannot speak or read, will be available at private cost to the person needing the service. Entry to the UK will be subject to English literature and language comprehension testing to at least the GCSE level or that expected of a 16-year-old. This standard will not be required for tourists for obvious reasons. Government, elections, and justice. No person who has immigrated to the nation or is a child of a person who has immigrated to the nation will be allowed to stand or run for parliamentary positions in the House of Commons, be admissible for peerage to the House of Lords, or be put forward as a member of European Parliament. No person who has immigrated to this nation or is the child of a person who has immigrated to this nation will be eligible for any ministerial, secretarial, or chancellery position within any cabinet of the nation. No person who has immigrated to this nation, or is the child of a person who has immigrated to this nation, will be eligible to create or register a political party. Any person who has immigrated to this nation, or is the child of a person who has immigrated to this nation who is currently in such positions, will be required to step down. To simplify beyond specifics, no person who has immigrated to this nation or is the child of a person who has immigrated to this nation will be allowed to hold any degree of political office down to and including at the county level. This is not to their nation. They will have no say in the political affairs of state or citizens. No person who has immigrated to this nation or is the child of a person who has immigrated to this nation may become a judge, barrister, or solicitor within this nation. To simplify beyond specifics, no person who has immigrated to this nation or is the child of a person who has immigrated to this nation will be allowed to hold any degree of judicial, court, tribunal, or other influence on UK law, be it civil, criminal, case, constitutional, legislative, etc. This is not to their nation. They will have no say in the legal affairs of state or citizens. Other entry criteria. In line with some of the previously laid out, there must be some other mandatory criteria for those wishing to enter and stay within the UK, specifically with regards to crime and identity. This will include full biometric data gathering without exception of testing, full DNA profiling, dental x-rays, finger and footprints, and full facial photography and mapping. This is the absolute minimum and will be paid for by those hoping to gain entry to the UK. This will help swiftly identify any foreigner who has committed any crime within the UK. In the event of someone forcing entry to the UK, these tests will be carried out for database storage before their deportation. Their deportation will include the only piece of state paper published in every language of the world, a notice to never return to the UK under penalty of execution. This person will receive a lifetime ban on ever entering the UK again, even if legal channels are approached. Entering the UK illegally is a crime with lifelong repercussions. If that same individual is found in the UK again when cross-referenced with this database, they will face the penalty of execution. One does not simply cross the channel twice owing to ignorance, mental illness, or any other such excuse. The only people who will be exempted from this are people on tourist visas or people from trusted nations with negotiated treaties as laid out before. Their stay will be too short-lived to process this information anyway, and we wish to actively encourage people to come from abroad to spend money and invigorate holiday resorts and tourist areas. As for entry criteria regarding visas of the student or work variety, or merely people wishing to move to the UK in general, assuming we have the ability for people to simply move to the UK without a job in place, such as retirement or being simply independently wealthy enough that a job basically becomes unnecessary, I would like to add the caveat of mandatory IQ testing. Despite many people attempting to dismiss IQ as a legitimate measurement for anything relating to people and their intellectual ability, IQ is the single best predictor of likelihood of general success, ability, and aptitude. It is the single most attacked construct in psychology for somewhat obvious reasons, of it showing that black and brown people score lower than white people, and the supposed racism that this represents, rather than the objective reality of differing cognitive ability between clines. Despite this, it has survived every attempt to assail and delegitimize it, thus it is the best metric to be used as a test for general cognitive ability. To this end, entry to the UK for those looking to stay must be subject to at least one IQ test. The exact score of this is debatable. I believe it is not unreasonable for the minimum result to be 100, in line with the UK normed average. However, I would prefer that the standard be higher. We wish to encourage people who are the best and brightest to enter and enrich the nation. Not enrich in the modern sense of low IQ, low impulse control, mass violence, looting and civil unrest, but actual enrichment in the form of above average academic and work achievement. To this end, I would be tempted to increase the minimum to perhaps as high as one standard deviation, an IQ of 115. This would not only ensure a high standard of people entering the nation to receive education or work, it would also serve as a de facto limitation on demographic change owing to average population IQ differences around the world. A standard of IQ at 115 would effectively prevent migration from Africa, the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent, whose average IQ can range from as low as 60 to 90. However, it would benefit and advantage nations that have a higher global IQ, which coincidentally also happen to be high-trust, high-conscientious, low-crime nations, such as other European nations, Kanzuk and the USA, and also other nations found in East Asia like Japan. Even setting the above-average standard to something more attainable like 105 would put a massive clamp on the total world population that would be eligible to even apply. It should be noted this 100, 105 and 115 would be normalized to the UK, not the world average. You will notice throughout this I use statements to the effect of person who has immigrated or child of person who has immigrated. This is because, as is known, it is not uncommon for children of migrants to be more radical and extreme in their beliefs than their parents are. By restricting the rights of such children, it will be increasingly difficult for tribal blood libel revenge tier nonsense to be able to manifest, with the hope that by a third generation, such people would be naturalized to such a degree that this would subside, although this could be extended to third generation migrants as well if needed, although this becomes increasingly extreme with each additional generation added to the second tier list. To help with this, it may also be necessary to introduce restrictions on marriage and family formation, such as no person who has immigrated to this country may marry another person who has immigrated to this country. They either enter pre-married, or when here marry into the nation's populace. If this law applied to the children of such a union, which would force 2 generations of integration and hopefully, therefore, enough attachment to this nation so as to prevent radicalization away from this nation's interest. It would also allow for a basic degree of freedom, such as the ability to fall in love and form families, which we do not want to stop, but it does need to be encouraged in one direction, towards the UK populace with removal of the elements of the other over time. There would also need to be provisions made for odd cases of illegitimate children of migrants and their legal status, although I'm unsure how this would be done and would need to think on this very specific topic a lot more to begin to give an answer. To this end, with regards to marriage, I am tempted here to consider something regarding divorce law to favour UK citizens over immigrants marrying into the UK populace. However, I'm unsure of how this would work. Divorce law is already a heavily gendered minefield, and this would need to be fixed before placing any such restrictions based on immigration or nationality status. Indeed, divorce as a means of exploitation has already proven to be open to extreme forms of abuse, to the point I do not like the idea of handing yet another weapon to that particular institution. The aim should be to encourage marriage as a lasting institution, not one to be entered into as a means of long con, which it currently is. Other conditions related to the UK in general. Given the interest in the return and widespread use of the Union Jack and flag of St. George, which has happened at the time of writing, especially in regards to the Union Jack flag being removed by officials citing it as dangerous in one way or another, while other state actors raise up other nations' flags and go out of their way to take down national flags of the UK, including the Union Jack and St. George's Cross flags with great alacrity, in many such cases less than 24 hours, demonstrating that councils can get things done swiftly and efficiently, they just choose not to, signalling very much which side of this divide the government has chosen. To help ensure cohesion towards a national identity, the flying of any flags on any state infrastructure will be prohibited, with exceptions for the Union Jack of the United Kingdom. Individual nation flags of countries within the United Kingdom, namely the Cross of St George in England, the Saltire of St Andrew in Scotland, the Draigh Goch in Wales. There should also be some provision made for an official flag for Northern Ireland, since it seems to currently lack one. The Ulster banner is a popular choice in the nation, or the Saltire of St Patrick. This can be decided later. Provisions and allowances will still be in place for other flags on state infrastructure for specific reasons relating to the nation as a whole. The Royal Standard of the United Kingdom to represent the presence of the monarch of the United Kingdom. The various individual flags relating to the armed forces, such as the White Ensign of the Royal Navy, the Lion and Swords of the Army, and the Royal Air Force Ensign, as but 3 examples. There can also be allowance for individual county flags in their respective lands, or local coats of arms and crests for parishes or wards if applicable, and oddity cases relating to various locales such as the Cornish flag. This nation has a lengthy history of the use of identifying flags and heraldry, setting high standards that are still used to this day around the world. This will return. The flying of foreign flags on state infrastructure will be banned outright. The only caveat allowance for such flags to be used in any regards to the state is to signify the presence or alignment of foreign dignitaries where needed. For example, the flag of the United States at state functions featuring a visiting President of the United States of America. There will be one such flag displayed at any given time, maintained near the designated individual in question to denote their status at state functions only. Foreign nation embassies, consulates, and other diplomatic buildings will be permitted to fly a single instance of the flag of their nation to identify their nation of service. The flying of other nations' flags will be prohibited, including for personal use. Religious freedom. Religious freedom will no longer exist in the UK. Islam has singled itself out time and again as a uniquely hostile threat to the UK, and thus will be banned. All mosques dismantled or repurposed. The UK will be an actively anti-Islamic state. Muslims will be required to leave or be deported without exception. There will be no allowance to convert to other religions. This is owing to the tenets of that religion allowing for taqiyya, the ability for a Muslim to hide or deny their religion as a means of avoiding persecution; Tariya, the doctrine that allows lying in all circumstances, provided the liar is articulate enough with their lie that it becomes true, in other words, lying by ambiguity; and Kitman, the lie by omission. By dint of its teachings and doctrine of deceit, Islam and people who practice the religion cannot be trusted to be truthful under any circumstances, including denouncing or renouncing their religion. As such, they cannot live in a high-trust society and must be removed. This will be based on reasonable standards. Any person who registered themselves on the national census as Muslim or Islamic, or words to that effect, will be removed. If it can be demonstrated that the person in question has been routinely attending mosques, this will be taken into account with proof provided by CCTV footage, which is readily available because this nation is so heavily surveilled. There may have to be caveats for native-born white British people with expansive ancestry in this nation being given a chance to renounce the religion. However, given how untrustworthy the religion and its followers are, I do not see this as a good idea. As such, they must elect a Muslim-majority nation of their choice to be sent to, or assigned a nation as part of the resettlement scheme laid out previously. Other religions will be permitted to remain, but will have no special legal protections nor state funding or recognition. They must be administered privately via their own followers. The exceptions to this will be Christianity of all denominations. While I might think it more historically relevant to only support the Protestant Christianity of the Church of England and not Catholicism, Orthodoxy, or other denominations, indeed Orthodoxy having no history in this nation at all, any rise of this denomination is not a return to any sort of tradition and is, in fact, an invasion. Catholicism, having been removed centuries ago, is in much the same boat. Despite this, I believe there to be enough similarity to each other between these denominations and others that this should not cause significant strife. Christianity has, for the most part, shown itself able to coexist between denominations. Honourable mention to Northern Ireland for bucking that trend, though. Although in recent years, Catholics and Protestants in that part of the nation are increasingly putting their differences aside in favour of fighting foreign religions and foreign peoples. The other exception to these religious laws will be the pre-Christian so-named pagan beliefs of the UK, including the two major umbrellas of Druidic practices of the Celtic religion and Anglo-Saxon paganism in its various forms, Odinism, Fioncedu, Asatru, etc., with the view of these two umbrellas of Celtic and Anglo-Saxonism be formed into two formally state-recognised centralised and standardised settings, with allowances for various health and kindred denominations in a similar manner to Christian denominations stated above. The reason for this is both of these religions have existed in this country for centuries, in the case of paganism less formalised, frequently manifesting itself in various folk practices and the aesthetics of most so-called Christian holidays in this country. Basically, any holiday that isn't sitting inside fasting in silent prayer is actually pagan in origin. They have both shown their ability to work symbiotically and bring people together and create a unifying and functioning society. As such, these practices will be the only two religions that will receive recognition of the state as legitimate, and with the possibility of state funding regarding the construction of and maintenance of holy sites. This is actually another good reason to add pagan practices to the recognised state religion for protection. There are many cultural and historical sites in the UK that are explicitly not Christian, yet worthy of recognition, protection, reverence, and indeed worship at those sites. This allowance will give importance to those sites. There will, however, be the necessary primacy given to Protestant Christianity of the Church of England, owing to the head of state in the UK also being the head of that church. While I may personally not like that arrangement, it is still the most suitable for the nation with regards to its history and continuity. As I reach the end of this presentation, I would like to address the use of the death penalty through this pseudo-manifesto. The death penalty is an extreme act, and opening up that power to the state could result in abuse later. While I would like to see the death penalty enacted for rapists and murderers, regardless of national extraction, I understand the existence of the so-called slippery slope and the concept of mission creep, and I'm somewhat loath to hand the ability to execute people to the state, knowing that this will result in normalization and expansion. If the death penalty is unpalatable to be given to people of foreign extraction, you are welcome to substitute its mention with something to the effect of assets and property seized and sold to pay recompense to victims, or provide additional state income followed by deportation with order to never return. This has the problem of chancers taking multiple opportunities to attempt to gain access to the UK, especially via illegal means, but the hope is that with all other changes being made as a minimum, this should serve as a suitable deterrent to encourage people to not wish to attempt to enter the nation illegally to start with. Other things to address: I do not like the idea of handing any particular power to the state. Many of these proposals, unfortunately, do require some degree of state power. I am also painfully aware of the fact that there is no such thing as a temporary government anything. Any power given to a state will be permanent in some capacity, so their institution must be done with great care. It should also be noted that many of the proposals will require the repealing of many government powers and abilities, several types of human rights law, for example. Also the creation of multiple tiers of citizenship. These things will inevitably be kept by the government and used in expansive ways, in ways such as unintended and probably against the people they were initially developed to protect. I really do not know how this can be prevented if democratic handoffs in successive elected governments is to be maintained, other than to suggest that this is something to be dealt with as the problems arise. Unfortunately, as I indicated earlier, the problem has only become larger over time for being actively ignored and in some cases suppressed. Thus, the means to fix these problems must be larger and more extreme than had this been addressed in decades past. It is regrettable, but necessary.